Today, I'm sharing with you 10 small items that fall into vintage categories that you can sell on eBay for a big profit. This is the intro video in the series that I'm creating of 10 vintage small item categories that you can find to sell on eBay. I have created a downloadable PDF to help you keep track of all the things in the different categories that I'm going to be sharing across these 10 different videos, but also it's a place that you can start keeping track of things that you also find in those categories or others that you know will sell for a good profit. I'm going to link that downloadable PDF in the description box below, and I'll also link the playlist so you don't miss any of the videos in this series. Not only will I show you the 10 categories, I will also show you the exact research that I did for this series so you can see exactly what I am looking for. So whether you're finding this video within a day, a month, a year, or 2 years, you'll be able to go back and do this same research to see if these are still items that are selling really well, but also you can go in and look at things that you like to pick up or things that you think might be selling well, and you'll be able to see how they are actually selling on eBay. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Margaret. I've been selling on eBay, Etsy, and other platforms for well over 10 years, and I've been making videos just like this to help you make money on eBay and Etsy as well. And if you find this kind of information valuable, it would mean the world to me if you would consider subscribing to the channel, liking, and leaving a comment about something that struck you while you were watching the video. This lets YouTube know that I'm bringing valuable information to viewers. The first category in our small vintage items that are selling well on eBay are vintage cufflinks. And I am so happy to be able to share this with you because selling vintage cufflinks was one of the ways that I got into selling jewelry when I first started reselling. So I'm very happy to see a huge uptick in the sales of cufflinks. I'm coming into my Sellers Hub to look at research products, and I want to show you the research that I did for cufflinks so that I knew that these items were things that are not only selling for a huge profit, but also on the upswing as far as selling more frequently. And I'm going to show you exactly how I do this in just a few moments. So the way that I knew that cufflinks were on the upswing as far as selling more frequently is right over here. While I've typed in cufflinks, I put the last 3 years. You can come in here and select the different time length that you want, but I wanted to see over the last 3 years, what have cufflinks been doing? So I scroll down, and right over to the side here, I'm selecting Show Sales Trends. And at first when I look at this, I'm like, okay, it looks pretty good. There's a bit of an uptick starting right around here. And this is average sold price. But come look when I select this arrow and it slides over to total sold. You can see that there's kind of a top out here right around 650, 700 as far as units sold. And then right here around about a year ago, there started to be an uptick in the amount of cufflinks sold. So here you can see about 1,000 or more, so 1,200 sold in August by August 11th, and that is almost double what it was a year or two ago. So I like that I'm seeing this upswing in the sales of cufflinks. So this lets me know that while the average sold price is $77, as it shows right here, the amount that are being sold are almost double. When I come to eBay and I search for vintage cufflinks, I have this sorted by over $45, pre-owned, and sold and completed listings. The reason I chose to sort it this way is that I want to see what things are selling for a little bit more money. Most likely the things that I find will be pre-owned, and I want to see what has actually sold. So even within those parameters, over 1,900 sales. When I scroll down, you can see, and I have these sorted by ended recently, so you can see that there's lots and lots of different things. But when I did my research, I really wanted to exclude sterling silver or things that were gold, things that were Gucci or like really high-end brands, because those would be super obvious. Yeah, I'm going to buy gold, silver, or Gucci, Chanel, etc. type cufflinks. But what are the other things that might be a little more accessible to find and sell? And one of the things that I saw that was selling really well were Dante Incolay cufflinks. They look like cameos, and if I pronounced Incolay incorrectly, spell it out phonetically for me in the comments. But here you see, it looks like a cameo. And here, this pair sold for $85. I'm going to zoom in a little more so you can see that there. $85 on that pair. And this pair sold for $30, which, is still okay. If I find, usually cufflinks I can find for $1 or less, or I'll get them in a lot and bagged with a whole bunch. Scrolling down here, here's another pair. This is Artemis. This pair sold for $99. Here's another pair, really blurry photo. Helios, God, Chariot, $45 on that pair. Here's another one with Artemis, sold for $105. So I think you get the point. Here's another one, Hermes and Aphrodite, $165. So it looks like a cameo. The next type of cufflink that's selling really well are Wedgwood. And I tried to pick ones that you would be able to spot really easily. They're really showy. So this is also like a cameo, but this is like a bisque porcelain, which means it's not glazed. So here is a pair of Wedgwood bisque porcelain cufflinks. And usually it's going to have that blue background with the white image on the front part. $520. And I know there's a more specific way to say that, but I can't think of what it is right now. Relief? Or is that where it's... No, that's intaglio. Don't give it. You'll get it. As long as you see what this is. If I got the words wrong as far as how to describe it, you'll have to forgive me. Somebody will tell me, I'm sure, in the chat. So you can see very clearly this blue Wedgwood cufflink design. Here's another one. These sell for $99. They're not always blue. For example, Wedgwood also makes a black background, and there's also a green. Oh, here's a white one as well. But you get the idea. So the two that I've shared today look like kind of cameo-esque. When we do a deeper dive into cufflinks, I'm going to share more cufflinks that are selling for a great profit. The next category on the 10 vintage small items that are selling well on eBay are vintage fountain pens. Vintage fountain pens are surprisingly easy to find. If you're looking at garage sales, estate sales especially, or at thrift stores, frequently at thrift stores, they might be in grab bags. I've found fountain pens frequently at estate sales when I'm looking in the office area. A lot of times the pens are all just thrown in together. And I've frequently found Mont Blanc pens, Parker, Waterman. They're out there. You can totally find them, and they can bring a huge profit. Coming back over to researching products, I typed in fountain pen, and I saw the average sold price over the last 3 years was $114, which is fantastic. As you can see here, average sold price, it looks pretty steady. And then we're going to slide over, and while the uptick isn't huge, there is a little slight uptick. Because the average sold price was pretty steady across the board, I felt like this was a great one to add to this video. I like it when I see an uptick, but you know what? Steady is really good as well. And with this sold price, average sold price, I think it's something that definitely needs attention. The first fountain pen that you should look for is from a brand called Parker. There are lots of different styles and colors of Parker fountain pens. This one sold for $125. But as we zoom out, you'll see that there's stainless steel ones. These, a lot of times you'll find in a box. They're like a pen set they may have been given as a gift. They won't always have a fountain pen. Sometimes it's a ballpoint pen and a mechanical pencil, or mechanical pencil and fountain pen. They don't sell for quite as much as some of the other Parker specific fountain pens. Here's one that sold, well, with best offer taken, $495. Here is a Parker fountain pen that sold for $153. You'll see on the clip here that would say clip into a pocket protector or into your pocket, it says Parker along that edge. And then also on the nib of the fountain pen, it will also be marked Parker. You can see this one's Parker and it says 18K. The next fountain pen brand that you should look for is called Waterman. This Waterman number 12 fountain pen sold for $112. And as you can see, there are lots of different styles of Waterman fountain pens. Here's a gold striated fountain pen that sold for $83. Here's another one that sold for $203. And this sterling silver Waterman fountain pen sold for $256. Before we go on to the next category, I want to show you exactly how I do this research and how I get to these graphs that I'm showing you here. So the first thing you'll do is you'll come click on Sell at the top, which will bring you to your Seller's Hub. Once you're in your Seller's Hub, come over to More, select Research from the dropdown. When you do that, you will have an empty Research Products page. So here I'm going to type in, let's say vintage gloves. I have a glove sitting next to me, vintage gloves. So I've typed in vintage gloves. Let's say I want to see, are vintage gloves something that are selling really well right now? It has defaulted to the last 30 days. And as I scroll down, I'm going to deselect this show sales trends, because if I deselect that, it will show the actual items that have sold in the last 30 days. Now, automatically, I'm noticing that some of these are not vintage gloves. Sometimes sellers will put vintage in their listing, even if they are not. So one of the ways that I get around that is I will come over and select used. Don't forget to hit apply. And then we can see the types of things that have been selling and what they're selling for. So right off the bat, in the last 30 days, average sold price is $36, which is not terrible. I can go through and start looking at what kinds of things are selling in that category. I'm seeing a lot of Barbie gloves. So I might come in and put in women's gloves or something like that if I was looking for something more specific like that. But if I wanted to see, say, the last 90 days, I can come select that over here and it will bring up what has sold in the last 90 days. I still need to select use. I did learn that I can lock selected filters, so I don't have to do this every single time. So I can then see the used gloves that have sold in the last 90 days. Now, if I want to see my sales trends where the graph is, I'm selecting show sales trends. Here I've got the average sold price in the last 90 days, right? And then I can also slide over and see the total sales graph in the last 90 days. I want to see if this is something that's having an uptick over time though. So I'm now going to come and select over the last 3 years. Over the last 3 years, it looks like the average sold price is pretty steady for just under between $30 and $40. But is there an uptick? Not too much, maybe a teeny little bit. It looks like there might be something popping up here, but watch this. So I'm noticing kind of a wave pattern. So it goes down, then it comes up. And if you'll notice, here it's December, right? So those colder months, right? December. And then it goes down and then it came up a little bit here again, January. Down and comes up. It's coming up over here, October, because it's getting colder, right? So you might notice with some of these that there are seasonal sales. So of course, with gloves, they're going to be a little more seasonal when they sell. The next item on the small vintage items that are selling well on eBay right now are vintage bracelets. What vintage bracelets should we be looking for? Certain brands, certain styles. We're going to have a mix of both. So one of the first things that I'm noticing are selling really well are vintage Whiting & Davis gold tone snake motif bracelets. I've seen a couple of this specific bracelet sell, but that being said, I did see quite a number of just snake motif bracelets that had sold. So this is one that sold for $75. Here is another of the same bracelet that sold for $65. The next vintage bracelet that I'm excited to see an uptick in sales on are these vintage Sweetheart expansion bracelets. So they expand out like an accordion. And this one sold for $164. Here is a child's bracelet that sold for $69. And here's another vintage Sweetheart bracelet that sold for $135. I realized I forgot to show the research. So let me come back, rewind. Let's take a look at this research. So I typed in vintage bracelet. Here I've got it sorted by the last 3 years. Average sold price, $75. And when I did my research here, I could see automatically, even with the average sold price, there is a definite uptick. And right here, it's certainly got a huge uptick in average sold price. But when we look, too far. When we look at the total sold, you can see it's going pretty steadily along, and then there is a big jump. So there have been a lot more sales. So in, let's say, September, so on September 1st, total sold 9,097. So comparing that to about a year before, that's 3,000 more that sold within a year on the same day. So there's definitely a huge uptick, not only in the amount of vintage bracelets sold, but the average sold price. The next small item on our vintage items that are easy to sell, easy to store, easy to ship, and they're selling for a great profit are vintage eyewear. Vintage eyewear is a little tricky when you're doing your research because some people put glasses, some people put eyewear, some people put eyeglasses, prescription glasses, frames, etc., etc. So when you are creating your listing, make sure that you include all of the different keywords that people might use to search, because there are quite a few different keywords that could be used depending on the person that's doing the searching. So this particular one used the word eyeglasses and frames. And when I was searching, I put eyewear, and then I tried searching glasses. And so you really just have to do a mix. But I would suggest when you're creating your listing, whether or not you can get it in your title, all of those keywords, find a way to get them into either your item specifics or into your description so that when people are searching, your item will show up in search. For example, when I was doing the research, here I put the word glasses. And that showed $44.32 for the average sold price. If I put vintage eyewear, now our average sold price drops to $19.66. If I put vintage eyeglasses, our average sold price is $38.48. So clearly, not all of the items are showing up in search. When I look at the average sold price on this graph for the last 3 years, I can see that there is an uptick in the average sold price. Then when I come over to look at the total sold, I also see that there is a jump and the total sold goes up somewhat. So when I see this here again, I'm noticing that there are still peaks and valleys with this. So it does look like in the winter time, for whatever reason, there seems to be more sold. But I did like that I saw that the total sold was on the increase as well. The first brand of vintage eyewear to look for are called American Optical. There are lots of different frames and styles as far as American Optical goes, but they are clearly marked so they're easy to find. So here are quite a few different frames. So here are these horn-rimmed frames. There are these kind of cat's eye. There are these that have the spring that goes around the ears. Lots and lots of different American Optical frames. One of the questions that I get asked frequently when I talk about selling vintage, especially prescription eyewear, is can you sell, because you can't sell, not supposedly, but you cannot sell prescriptions on eBay. The thing is that with prescription eyewear, you're not selling them for the prescription lens that's in the glasses. You're selling them for the frames. So the person that's buying these glasses are buying them and will likely get the lenses replaced at their optometrist. So you don't have to take the old lenses out, but you are selling basically the frames. I've had people ask, how do you know what the prescription is in the glasses? And you really don't need to know that. Here's a pair of vintage American Optical glasses that sold, and I wanted to show you the mark on the inside of these. It is clearly marked with an AO and American Optical. Here is another pair. You can see the AO right here on the arm. And this pair sold, it was $80 with best offer taken. Here's another pair of American Optical glasses that sold for $195 and another for $189. The next style of glasses to look for are the vintage drop arm side glasses. So that's where the side of the glasses, instead of having a straight arm, it will drop down where the peripheral vision is. I remember my mom had these. I think Jane Fonda in 9 to 5, that movie, that she had glasses kind of like this. So here's a pair that sold for $59. Here is another pair that sold for $79.99. Here are some more pairs that sold for $55, $42, $55. So if you find a pair of drop arm side glasses, definitely pick them up. The next item on our vintage small items that sell well on eBay are vintage compacts. This was another one I was really happy to find in my research because it's something I enjoy picking up and selling. They're so small, they're beautiful, they're easy to store, easy to ship, and they can bring in a good profit. So on my research, vintage compact, in the last 3 years, average sold price $44.23. I saw a slight uptick on the average sold price, which I liked. And then take a look at this. When I'm looking at the total sold over time, there is a definite jump right around a year ago, and a lot more are being sold. So total sold just October 20th, 959 compared to about a year ago. It's almost double what it was about a year ago. So there's definitely a huge jump in vintage compacts that are being sold. So which vintage compacts should we be looking for? First up are mother of pearl compacts. Here is a mother of pearl compact that sold for $72.50. Here is one that sold for $69. Scrolling down, here's another that sold for $100. And here are a few more. This one sold for $72, $45. These are like little purses, $75 there, $170 on that, and $50 on this one. Keep an eye out for mother of pearl compacts. And then next are Stratton compacts. This is probably one of the most common brands that I find, and they have lots and lots of different varieties, but they're clearly marked Stratton. So here's one that's got these beautiful flowers. This one sold for $49.95, $32 here. Here we've got this with a really pretty scene on it, $95 there, $45 on this one. And I know I've sold one like this before, but I wanted to show you the marking. It's really clearly marked on the back, Stratton. Next up on the small items that are selling for a huge profit on eBay are vintage digital cameras. And some of these I'm kicking myself because I know I had this camera. This sold for $139. Let's take a look at the product research that I did. I tried a few different searches. So I tried vintage digital camera. I tried point and shoot, which I'll show you as well. In the last 3 years, average sold price was $63 on vintage digital camera. And when I look at this, I'm seeing the average sold price, it's gone up a little bit. But when I looked at the total sold, I could definitely see an uptick. So while the average sold price didn't shift too much, the total sold absolutely did. So on September 22nd, 165 sold versus, about a year before, we're looking at around 70 or 50 there. So there are a lot more selling now than there were about a year ago, which is something I like to see because that means if you find them, they're going to sell a lot quicker. I also looked at vintage point and shoot cameras. My research there was not the best, but I could still see quite a bit of an uptick. There just weren't as many sold because I think maybe people aren't using that terminology, but it might be something to consider if you're putting that into your listing. The first camera to look for when you're out at garage sales or thrift stores, estate sales, is this vintage Canon PowerShot camera. So it will say PowerShot on it very clearly. This one sold for $90. There are different varieties. So this Canon PowerShot sold for $139. But as you can see right there, it says PowerShot very, very clearly on it. So Canon PowerShot. And the next digital camera on the list are Sony CyberShot. And once again, they're very clearly marked Sony CyberShot. This one sold for $99. Here is another Sony CyberShot that sold for $87. Here's one that sold for $119. Here's another one that comes in a blue color that sold for $129. And I feel like a friend of mine had one of these, but in pink. Next up on the small vintage items that sell well on eBay right now are vintage brass animals. At first glance, with vintage brass animals, you might think, how did this end up on the list? $37 average sold price in the last 3 years. There hasn't been a huge uptick in the price, but take a look at the average in what has sold. There has been a huge jump in the amount that are selling. So while the average sold price may not be a huge number, there are some that can sell for a lot of money, but the amount that are selling every day on eBay has drastically jumped. So it's gone from like 23 to 22 to, then about a year ago having 281. So that's a huge increase, almost 200 selling every single day. So being able to know that I'm going to pick something up and it's definitely going to sell a lot more quickly is something that I like to see when I'm picking up things to sell. First up on the list for the vintage brass animals that are selling well on eBay are vintage brass swans. I'm noticing an uptick on swans in lots of different areas. I'm not exactly sure why. I saw them in planters and other things as well. But I am seeing that vintage brass swans are selling for a big profit. So I'm seeing here, there's a pair that sold for $60, $169. These are a little larger maybe than what would technically count as a small item, but they're not huge. So some of them are definitely smaller. They're easier to handle, that's for sure. $74 on this one. This one might be it looks like a yard one, $115, but I'm not complaining, right? And here's a little lot. It's got, well, those aren't exactly swans, they're ducks. That looks like a mama duck. Maybe it's a swan. I don't know. But I'm noticing quite a few sleeping swans, some pairs of swans definitely selling for a good profit. And the next vintage brass item, it's not technically an animal, but it goes with an animal, are brass horse medallions. And they look like this, and a lot of times you'll see them sold in lots. You can sell them one-off, but if you can get a lot of them, then they can go for a lot more money. So here's a lot of 6 that sold for $59. Here is a lot that sold for $85. And when I look at just the recently sold, you can see here, you can sell them one-off for $15, $20. But really, when you start collecting them and having a lot to sell, you can start asking a lot more money. So here's a lot of what looks like 12 that sold for $105. And here are a couple more lots that sold for $60 and $100. The next item on our small vintage things that are selling for a good profit on eBay are vintage buttons. Vintage buttons were ones that didn't really see an uptick in the average sold price or even really in the amount sold, but it's just the pure volume of buttons that are selling that I thought made this really important to talk about. So in the last 3 years, average sold price $35, not a huge uptick there. And even when I'm looking at the total sold, there's a slight uptick, but it's almost not worth, it's about 2,000 being sold versus, about 2,000. So it's not really a huge uptick, but the fact that there are 2,000 plus buttons and button lots being sold on eBay all the time is worth noting. The first style of button to look for when you're at estate sales, I love going to estate sales and looking in their sewing rooms because this is where you're going to find this stuff, are the rhinestone buttons. So here we've got this lot of cluster rhinestone buttons that sold for $125. I'll zoom out here and you'll see that there are some clothes that are sprinkled in because sometimes they are noting the buttons that are on the vintage clothing. Here's another lot of 10 that sold for $45. Here is a lot of 80 that sold for $40. And here's another lot that sold for $49. The next type of button to look for are vintage mother of pearl and or abalone buttons. Here is a lot of 20 that sold for $50. Here is a lot of mixed abalone and mother of pearl that also sold for $50. Here are a couple of other mother of pearl / abalone buttons that have sold. One sold for $64 and the other one for $98.50. The next item on our small vintage items that are selling well on eBay are vintage fairy lamps. I stumbled across this research when I was doing another video for one of the other series, and I was so happy to see that there was an uptick in these because I absolutely love them. So this is a vintage fairy lamp. It holds a votive candle or a tea light, and it's got a top that comes off, and it makes really pretty light when you put candles and whatnot in them. So when I did my research for vintage fairy lamp over the last 3 years, average sold price is $42, and it doesn't look like a ton of an uptick. There's a little bit right there, but when I come over to total sold, you can definitely see that there is an uptick in the last year or so, maybe 6 months or so, that has really shot up quite a bit. So about 200, 205, 238 versus, during the summer, 147. So it's definitely seeing an upswing in those sales. And the first fairy lamp to look for are the Indiana Glass Amber fairy lamps. So the amber color is kind of this brown yellow color. Here's one that sold for $65. And I have this pulled up in 2 different ways because I wanted to show you, like, if you're not looking through the research, this is a way you can come in and kind of get an idea for the sell-through rate. So you can see here, I have it just completed and sold listings. It's not sorted by highest, first, or anything like that. 465 sold with my Indiana Glass Amber Fairy Lamp search. But when I come back and I take off sold and completed to see just how many are up for sale. So up for sale, there's only 24 with Indiana Glass Amber Fairy Lamp. 24 up for sale, 465 sold. So you can see there is a huge amount sold versus how many are up for sale. I love that. The next fairy lamp to look for are these vintage Fenton red ruby hobnail glass fairy lamp. This one sold for $85. And again, I see 50 are sold. Here's one for $74, $85, $149 on this one. And when I take off sold and completed listings, you'll see there are only 6 up for sale with the search that I did. So what does that tell you? That this is something that's selling really, really well. The next category on our small vintage items that are selling well on eBay are vintage mugs. You know, I had to go there. I love selling mugs. They are easy to store, easy to ship, and some can bring in a huge profit. So it's really important to know when you're going and scanning all the mugs at the thrift store, the garage sales, which ones that you should snatch up. The first mug brand to put on the list are Taylor & Ing. This is a brand I have loved selling forever, and it always sells really well. They're very easy to spot. They are usually either blue on a white background, or sometimes there's like a brown tan design on a white background. So there are rabbits. This one is Le Lapin. If I'm saying that in French wrong, my apologies. But like Le Poisson Chat, there's La Baleine that are in French. It'll have the whale or the frog. These are selling for a huge amount of money, $75. There's the cow, $79. Here's the cat again. Lots of different ones. There's the bull, $45 on those. Here are some other, this is the brown, this one's got that brown design on it. So 54 on that one, 50 on the other. There is a series of naughty Taylor & Ing mugs. They're line drawings, and there's like naughty giraffes and naughty bears and things like that. So those are ones to look for as well. Here's a naughty crocodile, $75. And the next brand of mug to look for are these Salmon Falls pottery mugs. They look like this stoneware style mug with the salt glaze, and they have a blue design on them. So here's one with a rhinoceros that sold for $185 for a mug, you guys. $185. Here's one with a snowman, $48. Here's one that's got a Christmas tree with a little bear, $179. And look, there's another one just like it, $179. Different seller, same mug. I love to see that. And when you're looking at this Salmon Falls stoneware pottery, there is a stamp, not always on the bottom, this one's on the side of the mug, that says Salmon Falls stoneware. Let me know what small item you think should have made it on this list, and definitely hit the subscribe button and the bell so you're notified and you don't miss any of the other videos, because I'm going to go deeper into each of those categories so that we can have a good working list of things to look for that are small, that are selling well right now for a good profit on eBay. Make sure you get that free download. It's in the description box down below, and I will link the playlist here so that you don't miss any of the videos in this series. I hope you found this video helpful, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you for hanging out. Bye.